When you think of organized crime, your mind probably jumps to those Italian mobsters in New York, or maybe Colombian drug lords. But today, we're going to Japan. Land of cherry blossoms, Nintendo, Pikachu, amazing food, and some of the most disciplined gangsters the world has ever seen, the Yakuza. These aren't your typical criminals who are throwing up gang signs and shooting up street corners. We're talking about guys in expensive suits with corporate offices and business cards. Dudes with full-body tattoos that cost more than a luxury car and missing pinky fingers. Guys who operate in plain sight and sometimes even work with the government. For decades, Yakuza organizations have been deeply embedded in Japanese society. At their peak in the early 1960s, they had over 180,000 members. I mean, that's not a gang, that's a small army. And like any army, they've had their share of legendary leaders. Guys who rose up from nothing to control criminal empires worth billions. Men who could order a hit with a nod and influence government policies with just one phone call. Today, we're counting down the top 5 most powerful and influential Yakuza bosses of all time. The men who shaped Japan's criminal underworld, and sometimes even the legitimate business world as well. These aren't just thugs who got lucky. These are criminal CEOs who built empires that lasted for generations. So pour yourself some sake and settle in. This is Apex Crime Lord's Top 5 Yakuza Bosses. Warning: the following video is meant for educational purposes only and should not be taken otherwise. Apex Crime Lords does not condone, encourage, or glorify the actions of the individuals covered in this program. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's kick things off with number 5 on our list. Kazuo Taoka, better known as the Bear. He was born in 1913 in Kobe. Now Taoka didn't exactly have a silver spoon in his mouth. His old man died before he was even born, and his mom just packed it in when he was just a little kid. I mean, talk about a rough start. So he was raised by his grandmother in poverty, and young Taoka could have ended up just as another statistic. Instead, he became one of the most feared men in Japan. Taoka joined the Yakuza game early, starting with the Yamaguchi-gumi, which was just a small local gang back then. But this guy had ambition written all over him. In 1946, right after World War II, when Japan was still picking up the pieces from, that thing that happened, Taoka became the third leader, or kumicho, of the Yamaguchi-gumi. And by the way, Yamaguchi-gumi comes from the founder, Harukichi Yamaguchi, with gumi meaning group or family in Japanese. Like most Yakuza organizations, they named themselves after their founder, just so you know. Now what happened next was nothing short of spectacular. Under Taoka's leadership, the Yamaguchi-gumi expanded from a small regional gang into Japan's largest Yakuza organization. And this wasn't just luck. The Bear had vision. While other Yakuza were fighting over gambling dens and protection rackets, Taoka was thinking bigger. He moved his organization into construction, real estate, and entertainment. He formed relationships with politicians, police officers, and legitimate business owners. The Bear wasn't breaking knees, he was breaking into boardrooms. Taoka ran the Yamaguchi-gumi with an iron fist for 35 years. During that time, he survived multiple attempts on his life, including a famous incident in 1978 when a hitman put a bullet in his neck at a restaurant. But the Bear, being the tough SOB that he was, he survived. What made Taoka special wasn't just his longevity or his business acumen. It was his understanding that the Yakuza needed to evolve beyond just being gangsters. Under his leadership, the Yamaguchi-gumi developed its code of conduct, its hierarchical structure, and its business model. He was basically the godfather who brought the Yakuza into the modern era. When Taoka finally checked out in 1981, the Yamaguchi-gumi had grown from a small gang to an organization with over 13,000 members. It controlled territory across Japan and had its fingers in every pie from construction to entertainment. Pretty good from an orphan from Kobe. Coming in at number 4, we got a guy who technically wasn't a Yakuza boss, but he had every major gangster in Japan on speed dial. Meet Yoshio Kodama, also known as the Shadow Shogun. He was born in 1911, and Kodama was a different breed of criminal altogether. This guy wasn't some street thug who worked his way up. He was a right-wing ultra-nationalist who built a network of political influence that made him more powerful than any traditional Yakuza boss. Kodama's story reads like a spy thriller. He started off as a political activist in the 1930s, and then he got arrested for plotting to take down the government, and somehow ended up working for the Japanese intelligence during World War II. And what was his job? Looting occupied China of its resources to fuel Japan's war machine. And oh boy, did he get rich doing it. By the end of the war, Kodama had amassed a personal fortune estimated at around $175 million. That, my friends, is about $2.5 billion in today's money. Not too shabby for a guy in his 30s. But now here's where things really get interesting. After Japan lost the war, the Americans should have tried Kodama as a war criminal. Instead, they decided the guy was useful and recruited him as an informant. With American protection and his massive fortune, Kodama became what the Japanese call a kurumaku, a power broker operating behind the scenes. He used his money to finance the creation of the Liberal Democratic Party, which went on to rule Japan for most of the post-war era. And guess who had the party leaders in his pocket? Our boy Kodama. His relationship with the Yakuza was complicated. He wasn't a member of any clan, but he had deep ties with all the major organizations. He could make a phone call and have the Yakuza disrupt a protest, protect a politician, or intimidate a business rival. The Shadow Shogun's reach extended beyond Japan as well. In the 1960s and 70s, he worked with the CIA on various operations in Asia. This guy was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Kodama's power was finally dented by the Lockheed bribery scandal in 1976. Turns out that he'd helped the American company bribe Japanese officials to buy their planes. Even then, he managed to avoid jail time. The Shadow Shogun finally shuffled off this mortal coil in 1984, but his legacy lives on in Japan's complex relationship between organized crime, business, and politics. He showed that real power often lies not in the fists of gangsters, but in the briefcases of the men who control them. Sliding into the number 3 spot, we got a guy who doesn't get as much press as some of the other Yakuza bosses, but his impact on the organization was nothing short of revolutionary. Meet Kazuo Congo, the guy I like to call the Innovator. Born in the hardscrabble Asakusa district of Tokyo in 1928, Congo's early life was a classic Yakuza origin story. You got poverty, street fights, petty crime, the usual stepping stones for a kid heading toward a life outside the law. But what set Congo apart was his brain. He wasn't just some kid with quick fists. This was a guy who understood that the world was changing, and that the Yakuza needed to change with it. Congo rose through the ranks of the Sumiyoshi Kai, one of Japan's largest Yakuza organizations, during the economic boom of the 1960s. While traditional Yakuza were still focusing on gambling, loan sharking, and protection rackets, Congo saw bigger opportunities. He was the first Yakuza leader to really understand the potential of Japan's soaring stock market and real estate values. Under his guidance, the Sumiyoshi Kai set up front companies, invested in legitimate businesses, and basically created the blueprint for how organized crime could launder money through Japan's skyrocketing economy. And his innovation didn't stop there. Congo was one of the first Yakuza bosses to expand operations internationally. He set up outposts in Korea, the Philippines, and even Hawaii. He established relationships with the triads in Hong Kong and Taiwan, creating a network for drug trafficking that brought in millions. But Congo's real genius was in what the Japanese call minbo, the art of corporate extortion. He perfected the technique of buying small amounts of stock in major companies and then threatening to disrupt shareholder meetings unless they paid protection money. This was genius. On the surface, it was totally legal, but intimidating enough that companies would pay just to avoid the hassle. By the 1980s, nearly every major corporation in Japan was paying some form of tribute to the Yakuza, thanks to Congo's innovations. Unlike some bosses who lived a flashy lifestyle and drew attention to themselves, Congo kept a low profile. He dressed kinda plain, he lived in a modest house, and he could have easily passed for a mid-level executive rather than a crime lord who controlled billions. His downfall came in the early 1990s, when Japan's economic bubble burst. a lot of the Sumiyoshi Kai's investments went south, and rival gangs started moving in on their territory. Congo managed to help his organization weather the storm, but his health was failing. He died of natural causes in 1997, one of the few Yakuza bosses to die peacefully in his bed, rather than by the gun. His legacy lives on in the sophisticated financial operations that are now standard practice for Yakuza organizations worldwide. Congo taught the underworld that in the modern era, the pen is not just mightier than the sword, it's also a lot more profitable. Taking the number 2 spot on our countdown is the man who brought the Yakuza into the 21st century, Kenichi Shinoda, also known as Shinobu, or what I like to call the Quiet Godfather. He was born in 1942 in rural Kyoto Prefecture. Shinoda's path to becoming one of Japan's most powerful crime lords wasn't exactly typical. Unlike a lot of the Yakuza who dropped out of school early, Shinoda actually graduated from high school and briefly attended a university. The guy had options, but he chose the underworld. Shinoda joined the Yamaguchi-gumi, Japan's largest Yakuza organization, in his early 20s. His intelligence and strategic thinking helped him quickly rise through the ranks, but he had a different kind of intelligence from your typical gangster. Shinoda wasn't just street smart, he understood economics, politics, and social change. In 1972, Shinoda earned his Yakuza stripes in the most traditional way possible. He helped a guy join the Heavenly Choir during a territorial dispute between Yakuza factions. This brought him a 13-year all-inclusive stay at one of Japan's finest correctional facilities. But now prison didn't slow this guy down. If anything, it sped up his rise. While inside, he built connections, he studied, and he prepared for his return to the organization. When he got out in the mid-1980s, Shinoda continued his ascent through the Yamaguchi-gumi hierarchy. By 2005, he had reached the top, becoming the 6th Kumicho, that's the supreme boss, of the Yamaguchi-gumi. Now what makes Shinoda so remarkable is how he adapted the Yakuza to a changing Japan. By the early 2000s, the Japanese government was cracking down hard on organized crime with new anti-gang laws. The old ways of doing business were becoming more dangerous and less profitable. Shinoda's response was nothing short of brilliant. He expanded the Yamaguchi-gumi's legitimate business holdings and moved deeper into finance and real estate. He established a corporate headquarters in Kobe that looked more like a Fortune 500 company than a gang hideout. He implemented strict codes of conduct for members, forbidding drug use, and telling them to behave more like respectable businessmen than street thugs. Under Shinoda's leadership, the Yamaguchi-gumi grew to over 40,000 members, nearly half of all Yakuza in Japan. His organization's estimated net worth reached into the tens of billions of dollars. But now, like any good CEO, Shinoda had to deal with internal dissent. In 2015, the Yamaguchi-gumi split, with several factions breaking away to form their own group. It was the biggest shakeup in the Japanese underworld in decades. Now, despite this setback, Shinoda maintained control of the main organization until his retirement in 2021. What's most impressive about Shinoda is his adaptability. In an era when the Yakuza traditional sources of income, like gambling and prostitution, were now under pressure, he found new revenue streams. When public opinion turned against the visible signs of Yakuza membership, he had his men cover their tattoos and remove their flashy suits. The Quiet Godfather showed that even in organized crime, it's not always the loudest or most violent leader who succeeds. Sometimes it's the one who can read the room and adapt to the changing times. And now we have reached the top of our list. The number 1 spot goes to a guy who transformed the Yakuza from a criminal organization into a corporate empire. Meet Yoshinori Watanabe, the corporate godfather. He was born in 1941 in Osaka. Watanabe's early years were nothing special by Yakuza standards. He dropped out of school, got into fights, and joined a local gang. You know, the usual resume for a budding gangster. But now what set Watanabe apart was his vision. He didn't want to be just another thug with tattoos. Oh no, he wanted to be the CEO of crime. Watanabe joined the Yamaguchi-gumi in his early 20s and began climbing the ranks. He had a talent for making money that caught the eye of the leadership, while other gang members were still thinking small, like gambling and protection. The basics. Watanabe was looking at the big picture. He saw opportunities in Japan's booming economy of the 1970s and 80s that others somehow missed. In 1989, Watanabe became the 5th Kumicho of the Yamaguchi-gumi, taking over from Masahisa Takanaka, who had been helped to permanently unsubscribe from life by rival gangsters. The timing could not have been better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. Japan was at the height of its economic bubble. Money was flowing like sake at a Yakuza wedding, but the country was also starting to crack down on organized crime, passing the first anti-Yakuza law in 1992. Watanabe's response to these challenges was nothing short of revolutionary. First, he massively expanded the Yamaguchi-gumi's membership, bringing in smaller gangs from all over Japan. Under his leadership, the organization grew from about 20,000 members to nearly 40,000. Second, he restructured the organization to look more like a corporation than a gang. He created departments. He established clear chains of command and implemented a system of black books that outlined every member's responsibility and revenue targets. Third, and most importantly, he diversified the Yamaguchi-gumi's income streams. Watanabe led the organization deep into Japan's real estate and stock markets. He established front companies in construction, entertainment, and finance. By some estimates, at the height of his power, the Yamaguchi-gumi controlled assets worth over $50 billion. And that's not just criminal enterprise money. That's more like Fortune 500 company money. What truly sets Watanabe apart from other Yakuza bosses was his ability to maintain relationships with Japan's political and business elite. Unlike the flamboyant gangsters of the past, Watanabe was discreet and sophisticated. He could move comfortably between the underworld and the upper world. Politicians looked for his support in elections. Businessmen wanted his help in settling disputes. So this guy wasn't just a criminal, he was a power broker. Under Watanabe's leadership, the Yamaguchi-gumi became so entwined with legitimate businesses that it was sometimes hard to tell where one ended and the other began. His members sat on corporate boards. They owned shares in major companies. They had business cards, and they paid taxes. In 2005, Watanabe retired from his position, handing over leadership to Kenichi Shinoda. Unlike many Yakuza bosses who met violent ends, Watanabe died peacefully in 2012 at the age of 71. He left behind an organization that, despite increasing pressure from law enforcement, continues to operate as one of the world's largest criminal enterprises. Watanabe's legacy is the blueprint for how organized crime can survive and even thrive in the modern era. He showed that in the 21st century, the most dangerous gangsters don't look like gangsters at all. They look like businessmen. So there you have it, our countdown of the 5 most powerful and influential Yakuza bosses of all time. From Kazuo Taoka's iron-fisted expansion of the Yamaguchi-gumi to Yoshinori Watanabe's corporate restructuring of the entire organization. These men shaped not just Japan's underworld, but sometimes its legitimate businesses and political worlds as well. What makes the Yakuza unique among criminal organizations is their visibility. Unlike the Italian Mafia or Colombian cartels that operate in the shadows, the Yakuza have historically operated in plain sight. They've had offices with their gang logos displayed outside, business cards, company parties. At their peak, they were almost like a parallel government in Japan. But the times, they are a-changing. Japan's anti-Yakuza laws have gotten tougher. Public tolerance for organized crime has decreased. Membership in Yakuza organizations has dropped from around 180,000 in the 1960s to less than 30,000 today. The days of tattooed gangsters openly throwing their weight around are fading. The future of the Yakuza likely lies in the lessons taught by men like Shinoda and Watanabe. Less visible, more corporate, and make yourself harder to distinguish from legitimate businesses. The old-school gangsters with missing fingers and full-body tattoos is being replaced by the guy in the tailored suit who looks like he could be your accountant. Next time on Apex Crime Lords, we're heading to the Wild West to tell the story of the most famous outlaw in American history, Billy the Kid. From his early days as Henry McCarty to becoming the legendary gunslinger who helped permanently unsubscribe 21 men from life before he turned 21. We'll separate fact from fiction about the babyface killer who became an American legend. Was he really the cold-blooded killer portrayed in dime novels? Or was he just a young guy caught up in the Lincoln County War? And what really happened during his famous escape from Lincoln County Courthouse, where he managed to help 2 deputies cancel their subscription to life, all while being shackled? Don't miss this wild ride through the short but explosive life of the Old West's most notorious outlaw. Join us to learn the real story behind the legend of Billy the Kid. As we look at these 5 criminal masterminds, it's worth asking some questions. How did these guys build criminal empires that lasted for generations, while American and European gangsters often flamed out after a few years? What does the Yakuza's integration into Japan society tell us about the relationship between the underworld and the upper world? And perhaps most importantly, as traditional Yakuza culture fades, what do you think is going to replace it? Will organized crime in Japan simply take on new forms? Or could we see the genuine decline of one of the world's most enduring criminal organizations? Now, these aren't easy questions, but understanding the men who built and shaped the Yakuza gives us some clues. They survived because they adapted. They thrived because they understood power in all its forms. And they lasted because, for better or worse, they built organizations that were more about just crime. They were about identity, belonging, and tradition. How do you think these Yakuza bosses will be remembered? As criminals who brought shame to Japan? As businessmen who happened to operate outside the law? Or something in between? Well, that's up for you to decide. Let us know what you're thinking in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this program, how about a like, a share, and a subscribe? Really helps us out. Until next time, stay safe and stay dangerous.